I'm Steven. I'm going to talk about Flexbox today. I, like Eric, am also old. But the fact that I'm talking about Flexbox makes me cool and sexy and young. The reason is Flexbox just won an award. How many people know that? The Technology of the Year award. Yeah. Tab Atkins. Yes, I know it. So it just won an award, which is weird, you know, a CSS module that wins an award, but really, really cool. So congratulations to all the people who worked on it. Flexbox is crazy. We can't talk about everything about Flexbox today. It's too much. You could have a day-long workshop at least about it. So what I want to do is talk about it enough that you'll get, how many people use it, Flexbox? Okay, well, the new syntax? Hands? Yeah, some, okay. Well, you know, we'll see if you learn anything new. If you actually use it, then you probably know some of the stuff I'm talking about today. If you don't, then you'll have enough to go check things out and experiment for yourself. So that's about all we have time for today in such a short session. But first, we're talking about space. Buzz Aldrin, playing around on the moon. This is pretty cool. And it took about 8 years. The Apollo space project started in 1961, and it lasted 11 years. It took about 8 years to get a person on the moon from the time they started the project, okay? So this is a great accomplishment. This is the world's first web server. Tim Berners-Lee wrote the first web server software and the first web browser in about a year, okay? And there's this little thing up there that says, do not power down, because the whole web would just collapse. So it's a little different now. CSS Level 1 took roughly 2 years, and of course people were working on things before that, but just to get the Level 1 specification took roughly 2 years to do. So you kind of know where I'm going with this, don't you? We've had CSS for about 17 years, and we just now have real layout. That is weird. But thank God we have drop shadows, right? So now we have layout with Flexbox, but it's not the only form of layout. There are other forms of layout. When I ask people, like, I know quite a few people who work at browsers, and I was like, why do we not have layout? And they said layout is hard. It's hard. I can appreciate that. But this is the latest rover, one of two that are roaming around Mars right now. Okay, this is a robot. There are two of them, two robots roaming around Mars, another planet. And layout is hard. Okay? I appreciate it. It's probably harder than, you know, putting robots into space, but luckily we had our guardian angel, Tab Atkins, who said to me, he doesn't even remember this, I'm sure, but in the W3C style mailing list, in 2009 it was, when I was first starting to talk about Flexbox, he said, layout solutions are an interesting area in CSS to me. And that's really, that's kind of like an understatement of the year. So he's not the only one responsible for Flexbox. Flexbox was there. It was a pretty incomplete spec, but being a spec writer and believing in getting everything perfect and unambiguous, one of the most important things about a spec is that there are very few loopholes or ambiguities that people don't know how to either implement something or they don't know how to work with it as an author. And Flexbox is an interesting spec because it's very, very complete, but it's readable for authors as well. So if you go read this Flexbox spec, you'll understand everything I'm talking about today. Probably more so than you would some other specs that are really bad, like grid positioning from way back when, which is got a lot of holes in it. So it's very hard to imagine how things would work. So as far as I see, there are these two major types of layout, and there are 2 to 3 different proposals right now to deal with those. Grid and template layout deal with general page layout, And this is an important thing because we don't want to use Flexbox for general page layout. It's usually for UI components, toolbars, different components in your applications or what have you. And for general page layout, we want something that's like a grid that you can just hang things onto on little slots and move them around. So this is being developed right now. This is kind of a combination. They're actually two separate specs, but they'll probably be combined into one. They are kind of combined into one, things from each. And Flexbox is here right now. So we can use this. We could try this out a little bit in IE10, but it's coming. So we have to be patient once again, because this stuff is hard. Tab wrote an article a long time ago called Flexboxes aren't ideal for page layout. This still applies today. Flexboxes are great. Basically, for those who don't know, a Flexbox is you have a Flex container and you have Flex items in the container. So they're just boxes. And if you want to make complex layouts, like page layouts with these things, then you have to nest these boxes. And if you nest enough, then you start having these flashbacks to table layout. Which the flashbacks in and of themselves will just drive you to drinking. But this is, you don't want to go back to table layout, even if it's with CSS, okay? So that's a good article to read. So let's get started here. What you need to do with Flexbox is get used to the terminology. The terminology was thought up to be pretty abstract. So we usually think in terms of top to bottom, left to right. So you have to forget that. In fact, leave all your preconceptions about layout, everything you've done ever since you started working for the web, right? Forget all the layout stuff when you think about Flexbox, because it's a totally different way of thinking. It's useful to not think in terms of floats and positioning and even display table when you're dealing with things like Flexbox. So we're going to talk about these things, okay? And they're not very hard, but it can get a little bit weird to get your head around. So this is Bob. Bob is the name for this thing here. I like to give things names just because I don't know, I'm fucking weird. I don't know. So this is Bob. Just go along with me. Bob's a Flex container. Okay, that means he's the parent to the Flex items. And these are the Flex items. Okay, they live in a Flex container. Anonymous block boxes are also Flex items. So if you were to have a div and you just have text in the div, but the text is not in a paragraph or a block quote or what have you, that becomes a Flex item as well. So if you have several paragraphs that are not within the paragraph elements, there'll be one anonymous Flex item box together. Okay, so that's how that works. The main axis is the axis along which your Flex items go, really. So they're going, in this case, in that direction, left to right in this case. So that's the main axis. So we just got to get that terminology. This is the cross axis. It's the other way, right? So this is kind of different. And it's pretty easy to understand when you think in terms of left to right and top to bottom. But why is this so? The reason is we don't always read from left to right. So if your text direction of your document, because of the language you're using, is right to left, this still applies. The terms still work. Only the main axis will go from left to right and the cross axis will go from top to bottom, or even bottom to top. Just depends on how you do it. So it can go any which way. And now it gets a little bit more complicated. We have the concept of start and end instead of left and right. Start and end, because we don't know where start is, we don't know where end is. So if we call it start, it doesn't matter where it starts. That's just the start. And then the end, if we go from left to right, it's the main start because it's the main axis. The center, luckily, is the center. And then main end and cross start and cross end. Okay? Am I going too fast? This is what happens when your flex boxes when the main axis is the other way. So the main axis, in this case, is from top to bottom. And perpendicular to that is the cross axis. So the main start is at the top instead of left. And the cross start is on the left instead of the top. And luckily, I'll be showing you examples to get this more clear. So these are the properties. There aren't very many. And what I've done here is just separated the properties out to what elements they apply to. These apply to flex containers, and these apply to flex items. So it's 12 properties, not very many, pretty easy to grasp. And actually, there's some shorthand in there, so some of these you practically never have to use, which is a good thing. Okay, so memorize this for a minute, because you will be tested at the end. Okay? One of the concepts in Flexbox is direction. We just talked about the main axis and the cross axis. So the main axis changes. If it's not horizontal, it's vertical. So how do we do that? That's with flex direction. And we have, just as in tables, rows and columns. Everyone understands rows and columns. So row is horizontal, column is vertical. And when you give a direction to the container, all of the flex items follow the flex direction. So when I say flex direction on the container is column, then my flex items will line up by default, basically the same way block level elements would line up, just from top to bottom. But flex direction row would set these things up horizontally. The preferred syntax is the shorthand flex flow, which allows you to combine flex direction and flex wrap. And wrap just says you want the flex items when they're too many, when they expand beyond the flex container. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to wrap? The default is no wrap. Or do you want them to just overflow, basically? So another important concept in Flexbox is flex. And flex has its roots in Zool, the language that Mozilla uses, I guess, for laying out Firefox. And the flexibility that those elements had, that they had in those languages, was one of the inspirations for Flexbox. So this is very, very important, because this is one of the cool things about Flexbox, arguably the most cool thing, is that the elements you can play around with what happens with the available space within the flex container. So the shorthand for flex is flex, and you have basically three values: flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Flex grow says how much available space, if it's there, would you like this element to take up, basically. What's the maximum amount of available space it could take and grow to? And shrink does the same for when the element has to get smaller. And the flex basis is, compare it to width. So your flex basis could be the width of the element itself. So if the element originally is 100 pixels, then you could just set the flex basis to auto, and it'll take that as a given. So this is hard to explain, really. I always have trouble explaining it, so I'll have to show you some examples. There are some shorthand things that you can use. Flex initial is the same as having a flex grow of 0, a flex shrink of 1, and a flex basis of auto. So these three boxes are 150 pixels. That's the width that I put on these boxes. And since I'm using auto as flex basis, then they stay 150 pixels. But I've said that if the flex container gets too small, then they can shrink just slightly. Here, they have to divide the space that they shrink amongst each other. And this says they're not going to grow at all. So that's why they don't flex out. They're just 150 pixels. Okay? This is something that you kind of have to also get into a browser and try these different things to see what they do. Flex Auto is almost the same as the other one, only I've said here the Flex Grow is 1. That means that if we go back here, this is X amount of available space. And I've told them that they can grow to 1, which means that each one takes 1 amount of the available space. The available space is split up evenly between all of the items and added to the width. Okay? Crazy. But this is, you could probably start imagining all the things that you could do just with this, right? Because imagine toolbars or menu bars where you had percentages, you've got five things in there, and you're like, okay, 105, there's 20%, yeah, but we have to put box sizing on there, so you know what I mean? And then the client comes and says, oh yeah, we have a 6th item, and you're like, God. So this is helpful for that. When you don't flex things, this has no shrink, no grow, and auto, so it takes the width again. It basically, in this case, has the same effect as flex initial. And normally you'll be writing things out like this, but these are little shorthands for these things here. Now, this is the example that we just had, basically. If you give flex an integer, and you do this on the element, not on the flex container, then what that does is it sets the flex basis to 0 pixels, basically. So basically it says ignore the width that you had and just make it flexible according to n right here. So right now n is 1, which means they split the available space. They add it to the width, and that becomes the width of each of the elements. But not all flex elements have to be the same. So you can give one flex element more flex than the others. And this is, we talked about this morning because the algorithm, I'm not really much of an algorithm person, so I had to ask Tab the best way to explain this, is like when making a cocktail or something. So you have this available space, and you say, okay, we're going to split it up into parts, and we'll take, in this case, the first 2 flex items each get 1 part of that available space, and 2 parts of that available space go into the last one. So basically, that was split up into 4 parts of available space, and we gave 2 to the last one, and each one of the first boxes got 1. So that's kind of how it is: 2 parts water, 100 parts heavy Scotch whiskey. So you can do these kinds of things. And it doesn't matter what numbers you fill in, it's more of a proportional thing. So the last example, we split the available space into 4 equal parts, and now we're splitting it into 8 parts. So this is, it doesn't matter. It just uses the available space and splits it up the way you want proportionally. Okay? So, any questions about this in between? Because I can imagine it might be hard to.
How do you direct which of the flex elements you're actually sizing?
Right. These are the question was, how do you direct? How do you tell which element to have a certain the certain flex? Right. That's what the E is. That just might, I guess, more people use it as shorthand for element. So you put on the element itself. Say you give it a class or an ID or whatever, or do what I did here, inline styles, evil, Satan. But that's what you do. It applies to the element itself. So you can use the fancy selectors that Bert was talking about, or just put a class or ID on there and say that element has to be larger.
So it would be 3 selectors.
In this case, you would have 3 selectors. Yeah, I'm actually selecting each element and telling it what flex it has. Yeah, correct. So this is flex is something that's one of the properties that applies to the Flex items and not to the Flex container. But if you think about the fact that you have the Flex container, you can just say, I want all my items to be horizontal. So Flex direction row, instantly all your boxes are horizontal. So those are pretty handy. But there's no other way to do it, really. I mean, you have to tell a specific element to have a certain amount of flex. So another concept in Flexbox, that Flexbox gives us is alignment. And alignment, we don't have to use Flexbox specific things, but things like margin auto, that you can do really cool things with it. In fact, for these slides, I've got a margin auto on the top and then a margin of, I think, 2 M's on the bottom to put these here. And then on this one, I have no margin on the bottom, and this is margin top auto. So basically, auto is smart within the Flexbox. It just takes up all the available space, and you get the effect of just aligning your items to the bottom, which is, pretty easy compared to how we do some layout things right now to achieve the same effect. So this is great. There are different types of alignment. So along the main axis, you can use justify content. And these are some things that we could probably play around with. These are the properties, the flex start, flex end, center, space between, and space around. This is pretty obvious, I think. Justify content. So if you think about a text editor, text like even Microsoft Word or something, you can align your text to the left side or right align it. This is kind of like that. Okay, it's across the main axis, whichever that is for you. So let's say the main axis is from left to right. Then flex start would put these all to the other side. I'll do a couple of these, and you can see what they do. Only my screen is kind of spaced out. See, inline styles. Okay, so here, let's do one of the cool ones like space between. Okay, so space between just splits up. It doesn't add available, it works with the available space, but it doesn't add it to the width of the element. Now you're dealing with the spacing of the elements. So this is pretty useful. You can probably imagine things in your own projects that this would be good for. There's also, let's try the other one, space around. So that you kind of have to see that one. What this does is it adds equal amounts of available space between the elements and then a half of that amount on either side. So here, this is exactly 1/2 of the amount in between these. So this is when you want some kind of padding, I guess. I haven't personally been able to figure out a use case for this, but I'm sure they exist, otherwise it wouldn't be in there. I'll hear about that later, I'm sure. Tab's looking at me as smoke's coming out. Flex start, well, you get the idea. So flex end goes to the right-hand side. It's the same as saying right justify. Okay? So just with main axis alignment, you can do a lot. Pretty cool stuff. Work, thank you. Okay. Cross-axis alignment. Hold on, let me. Yeah. This is, you can align things along the main axis, but you can also align things along the cross-axis. And this has, the default is, I believe, stretch, which I have to show you because it's just so cool. It's better than I do this than that I actually type things out, because you wouldn't want that. Okay, that doesn't work. Why not? Okay.
This container is auto height, so they're already the right size.
The flex container is auto height, so they're already the right
It's
size.
already shrink wrapping the elements.
Okay, great.
It's just if the flex container is too big, then the items will grow up to it.
Right, okay. So let's just say I did it right. Whatever. Okay, it's cool, go. Okay, order. Order in the court. Order is cool because we thought we'd like to have some kind of layout where we don't have to worry about the source order, and especially now when you design a website, say responsively, you want it to have a different order on mobile than you would on the desktop. So we can do that, not accessibly, unfortunately, at this moment, because like speech, screen readers, etc., they'll read the source order and they won't read the display order of Flexbox at this moment in time. So there are some accessibility issues with that, but you can switch things around, basically. It doesn't matter what your source order is, which is kind of cool. So I do have to show you this one. This is actually in the order 1, 2, 3, but with order, I've put the last element first. And you could see here, these two items, this one and this one, have an order value of 2, and this one has an order value of 1. Now there's an easier way to do this, but just to give you an idea, you can kind of group items to a certain order just by using this property. So you can say, I want these elements to all be first, and I want these elements to be second, even though they're not that way in your source order. So another way to do that would be to, I think I have a slide for it, to do, if everything's the same except for one of them, or one group. Like let's say when you have some tabs and someone clicks on a tab and you for some reason want that tab to, the tab that's active to always be the very first tab, then you can use order -1. And I guess I'll show you that in the common, I'll show you here. So if you didn't have this or this, now it's 1, 3, 2, which is okay. 1, 2, 3. Now if we do -1, then it switches it back over. So the default is 0, and you can just use -1 and switch things over. But if you want to do more complicated things, you can group them in really interesting ways. So, okay. So here are there are some things that we can use these for. And what I want to do is see if we can get some ideas going and figure out how to do problems that you have here. I don't know if I'll type them all out, but we could discuss how we can do those things. So here are some. True centering. So how often have we wanted to align things vertically and horizontally at the same time? And now it's easy. It's just this. These two things. The one, if you remember, this has to do with the main axis. So in a lot of my examples, left to right, and this one is that way, the cross axis. So basically you're centering across two axes. So it's like this. And that's it. Very easy. So all these problems that we've been having, a lot of these things are solved by Flexbox. And it's just worth playing around with it to find out. So another thing is unknown menu items, which Krein gave me this one. So the example that I told you about, well, this is your menu bar, and the client says, oh, well, we want more. You know, because clients always want more. So then now you can just say, yeah, well, here you go, there you go, right? So this is great. If you have wrap, which is something you'll want to play around with as well. And once you have a minimum width of these elements and you don't want it to get smaller than that, then it can travel to the next line. And then you can use flex there as well to make those 3 things that overlap to the next line, expand those so that they fill up the second row, for example. So that's incredible in and of itself. Leah did a couple of examples with Flexbox where you can hover above. You did for your book, for the book.
I wrote that chapter with David. He did the Flexbox.
Okay, David did that. Sorry. I was trying to give you credit. So you can add transition effects to these as well. So let's say I hovered above this middle one, that it would grow even more. So just flex is something that you can transition, which allows for all kinds of crazy manner of slideshow things and other useless crap that we have on our websites. Okay, there we go. I'm having problems with this thing, yeah. Source order, which we talked about, this is the example I had, yeah. So this is a -1, here we go. Yeah, there, woo, okay. Wrapping, let's spend some time on this one. When you wrap things, this is one row of flex items that wrap across 2 lines. Now, we have to play with this to see what happens, because one of the ways to deal with your source order is just to flip things around, to reverse it. So you might remember that one of the properties, or one of the values that we have for the flex direction is column reverse and row reverse. If we do that, see what happens? This is kind of strange because, let me turn that off here. The top one starts here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the whole reading direction is reversed as well. So this is a really good way to flip things around if you want to. But let's try something else here, just so you can see how easy it is to do crazy stuff. So. Right? So I'm thinking Sudoku, puzzles, and stuff like that. Okay, that's the normal order. And let's take wrap out of there just for fun and watch what happens. And then it just overflows. So. Okay. So, can you think of some uses for some of this already? No? Who said that? I will find you. Okay. Tab groups. This is a cool one. Sometimes you have an interface where you have a toolbar or tabs that some of them are on the left and some of them are on the right. And you have space between them, and you have like a div left, div classes left, div classes right, to be able, and you have to like pull one element out and put it in the other div or something like that. You don't have to do that because now the way that margin auto works just takes up that available space if you're not, depending on what you're doing with the other flex items. Here, number 4 has margin left auto. And it just takes the available space and pushes it in between. So, let's get some of these out of there. That one and that one. So you get this kind of idea. So if these were tabs or a toolbar, you wanted some things on the right, some things on the left, they don't have to be in 2 separate containers anymore. You just have the toolbar container, that's a flex container, and then these 3 flex elements in there, flex items, and then give the leftmost one on the right-hand side the margin left auto, and then it just does this automatically. So this is pretty nice. Forms are one of the things that are really tough to deal with. So let's say you have an input field and a button, and you have this amount of space, and you want the button to be just as it is, and you want that field to take up the available space, and they're next to each other, much like this. So how would you do that? Very easily. Just add some flex to this one. So it's a simple example, but the power behind something like this, what you could do with it is just crazy. So all those little form problems where you're thinking in percentages, yeah, you don't have to do it anymore. So this is great. But wait a minute, we're not done. Yeah, this is the problem when you do everything in line. Oh yeah, what the hell am I doing? Yeah, you're right. Jeez. Thank you for. Yeah, what is that right-hand side? What is that? I don't... See, this is how you can play around with it. God, I've been doing that the whole time. I'm going home. Yeah, so you get the idea. You can just play around with these things, and it's great fun. So I'm interested to hear, before we have actual questions, I'm interested to hear a couple of use cases and see if we can't figure out a way to solve one or two problems in Flexbox, and then I'll take some questions. I just want to see if we can put this into practice in some way. So, someone call out some kind of funky problem. Yes.
Product listings pages on like e-commerce sites. That would help a lot, because currently we have to split it up into multiple ULs with like all the items floated left. So just having wrap on each of the products, and of course on mobile has to stretch to different sizes. This would solve all of the problems we have.
Right. Product listings. I kind of maybe want to write some of these down.
There's an example of that one in the spec, actually.
Okay, yeah, I know. Product listing. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, you know what? Let's look at that, because the one in the spec is this one right here. This is an interesting example, because you also have the available spaces split up so that these things line up, because clients always want things to line up all the time, and we haven't been allowed to do that, and we've been training our clients, or like cursing in the middle of the night and doing min height. So this is pretty cool. But what you said, if you had a whole row of these and just wrapped it, you could just have one Flex container with all these things and just let it go on and on and on as long as you want, which is really nice. So the thing that I was talking about with the layout is that this is a component. This is, some people call it a module or whatever. So Flexbox is great for this, and it's also great for the thing that it's in. But for the whole page, it's probably not as, it'll get complicated pretty quickly, because there's a lot of nesting involved. But this is a good example. Thank you. Other problems. Oh, wow. Yeah, just lots of problems.
I was wondering, the leftover space, you can either fill it with a box or not fill it with a box, but could you also have some stretchy background thing, listen to the flexing of the boxes?
Stretchy background thing.
I had this thing, I needed to have some elements on the left-hand side of the page and some on the right-hand side of the page,
yeah.
And the space in between needed a background image, hiding something, well, difficult.
I would say that would be an element, though.
Yeah, but lacking elements.
Is that including questions or? Oh, 5 minutes, okay. Okay. Excluding questions, thank you. So I would say if you wanted something that's exactly the same height, I guess, as the other things, then let's go back to, where the hell am I? This one here. So you would say that you'd want something right in between these two that's got a background that's kind of stretchy. Yeah, well, what I would probably do, if they have to be the same height and everything, is just have an element that has a picture in it, and then make it stretchy. The thing that I think is that if you have a background on the Flex container, then it's for the whole Flex container. So if this container were just as high as the elements, then you could add it to the background. But some of it would go behind here 1, 4, and 5. Because it's an image in the background of that element. So I would just put a picture in between. Yeah, an image. Does that help? Well, for the background, you would just use the normal background properties to, to do the sizing of that. So, other use cases.
I was wondering if we could recreate the table element with Flexbox to have reliable sticky headers and stuff you would want to do in a data grid.
You see the look of shock on my face. Recreate tables so that you could have sticky headers. Wow.
Well, the problem is that the table implementation and T-body, T-head, and how the elements react, it's inconsistent across browsers, so it's hard to recreate a fully functional data grid. So people have been doing it with diffs and display table cell using libraries like UE, but it's not really, doesn't really work the way you want it to. So
right.
I was wondering if you could do that with Flexbox.
Anyone know anyone of you involved with tables at all?
Kind of work, not well. The big problem is you can make the table box be a flex box and then have what he wants, but then you would, I need a microphone, sorry. All right, so you could kind of make it work. You could make the table element be a flex box, a column flex box, and that could let you do the sticky headers and footers. You would just make the T-body a flex, so it'll shrink into the available space and be scrollable and whatnot. The problem there is, though, you would lose the linkages between the columns in the head, the body, and maybe the foot, because they'd be now part of separate tables. They wouldn't be one thing. So they wouldn't line up properly anymore. So Flexbox isn't a great idea for that kind of thing. You want something more like a flexible grid, which grid layout can kind of do, and might be useful in the future for that.
Or extend tables?
Yeah, but nobody's really defined tables yet, so.
Okay. That sounds like a job for you.
No.
Well, does that answer it, kind of? Okay. 2 minutes, and then we have to have normal questions. Use case questions again. So just problems, the real-life problems you're having in websites. I saw a bunch of hands earlier, so either you're afraid of me,
No.
or you want me to go.
I just wanted to ask one more question regarding this wrapping. Is it possible actually to stretch the wrapped elements so that, for example, if you get many elements, some of them are fitting in the first line and few of them are jumping in the second line, to make those that on the second line still stretch to take the whole area?
Yes.
That's quite a common case.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't have that example in here, but you have to.
Just make those guys flex one.
Yeah.
And back to row wrap or something.
Yeah, but they're exactly, and we have to do that in line. I've got it at the right side. That's true.
There's a class right down there. You want to put it back? Yeah.
Shh, shh. Thank you. Tab, you're being pretty sarcastic.
No.
do. And then WebKit row. No, yeah, thank you. This is why I don't ever do live demos. It's just terrible.
Yeah, you get that on Bob.
Bob, FlexFlow, row. Here, I'll do that here because it's easier for me. Row wrap. See, the problem was with this talk is that Tab worked on the spec. Can you imagine the fear that I have?
Also, make their flex. He continues. Go back to the FXI class. Go back to the child.
Yeah,
Make its flex be 1 auto.
one auto. Thank
No,
you.
just fine, yeah, we're good. We're good.
This is awful. This is like
There you
doing a. It's all Tab. So yeah, explain that. One auto.
Oh, well, now I don't know. Sweet.
All right, so one auto expands fully into one auto. It means they can grow with a flex of 1, so they'll all be equal. They can also shrink if necessary, but because you're wrapping, you'll never shrink. And then auto means they will start from their auto size rather than from 0. That's why they were all shrinking down like super small before you added the auto there, because their starting size was 0, and then they just, sure, they can all fit on one line if you start from 0 and then fill in. So by starting from auto instead, they are now too big to all fit on one line, given their auto size. So they flow appropriately, and then the leftover space gets flexed.
Got it? All right. Do we have time for one real question, as opposed to all the fake questions we just had?
Yeah,
Yes.
this demo is a perfect example of something I was just thinking about. I don't know if you remember back in the table days, sometimes you'd have a requirement that you use cell spacing to introduce a border that was in consistent width between all the elements in a table. And as you can see, you've got a consistent sort of like brickwork pattern, except for on the edges. Is it possible to use Flexbox to create a consistent border width so that, for instance, you get the same width between cells horizontally and the top and bottom and left and right margins?
Give him the mic.
So if we wanted to turn this example into consistent all the way around, it'd be pretty easy. Just whatever border we're putting on the cells, also put it on the container. And that way they'd be doubled up between cells, doubled up on the container. It would all work out correctly. If you don't want borders, but you want just spacing to be all equal between there, it's a little bit harder right now. I'm going to be addressing it in level 2 of Flexbox, a little bit more spacing controls. So that kind of thing will be simpler in the future. But for now, you can get most of the way.
Okay. One more question. Wow. Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah. So
Just ask me something that I can give the answer to, please.
it's a very general question. Third dimension already hit mass market devices. And so do you know if there is any effort to make layout for 3-dimensional space? Because here, of course, you have only flat main axis, cross axis.
No. The answer is no.
So no way to make layout for new devices.
I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Okay. Wait a minute. I skipped a slide. Sorry. Hold on. Just forget about lunch. Here. Browser compatibility. Works pretty well in lots of places. And you can go to caniuse.com, which is what this says here. Basically, we're right here, and these dark green things are an older syntax. And that's kind of the problem with Flexbox, is you've got a couple different syntaxes around. Because I'm an idiot, I don't have the names of the browsers at the top of this table. so you just guess which one that is, right? That's probably Chrome, right? I think it's Chrome. This is Opera. I know that's Opera because there's no prefix. And that, yeah, that's something else. Okay. Thank you.